maybe they want to get another election in with a board that isn't completely run by fascists. That makes a lot of sense to me, because in a year from now, who the hell knows what we're going to be looking at.
Which side are you on? Which side are you on?
We have on the line now Sarah Jaffe, a freelance labor journalist and author of Work Won't Love You Back. Sarah, welcome to the program.
Good morning.
Good morning. Good morning. So it's kind of bonkers that we have not had you on the program before, but glad we could finally make it happen. In these times reached out to me because they were asking if you could come on to talk about the 32-hour workweek article. And that's initially why, we were planning on getting you on. But obviously the Mercedes election just happened. You spent a week down, almost a week, something like that, in Tuscaloosa for the election. I was not able to spend a week in Tuscaloosa. I wasn't able to spend that much time talking to workers at the plant, especially no voters. Every time I've been in Tuscaloosa, I've been at the hall. So it's, I'm always talking to the pro-union folks, and you've been able to talk to some more of the folks who voted no. So, I guess, first thoughts, some of your thoughts almost are a little over a week out from the results. And then, we can kind of talk about some of the latest with the NLRB's announcement yesterday.
Yeah, I mean, first thoughts, my first thoughts were just like being very sad. My a week on thoughts are kind of, there were a couple of Chattanooga workers from the Volkswagen plant who had come down to support the Mercedes workers in the back of the room. And I was sitting near them when the vote was coming in. And I was just like, they were just like, it's good for a first try.
Yeah.
And I think that, we really have to remember, and I mean, I don't think you and I need that much reminding that people in the South don't have the same culture of unions that you do in Detroit or in New York or Los Angeles, right? That there's a real, there's no experience of what it can actually mean to be in a union, and that when the union busting campaign turns on, it's like, it's aggressive. It's always aggressive. You and I could fill out a bingo card of everything that the company was going to say and do, right? Bring in a new CEO, check. Captive audience meetings, check. Identify the leaders and try to turn them, check. We know what they're going to do. But are you giving people a strong enough reason, not only to know what they're going to do, not only, doing enough inoculation, but a strong enough reason to really say no, we're going to push through all this and really fight to have this union here. And, a lot of the workers were saying, right, that after the stand-up strike, they had an easier lift getting people to see that they might want a union. But have people really learned how hard you're going to have to fight for this and started to see maybe that how hard the boss is fighting you is the reason you need the union? And I don't know if we're connecting those dots for people yet, because it's rough. It's hard out there. I was just talking to folks here. I'm in New Orleans about the death of the anti-union bills in the state legislature last week. And mostly it happened because the guys who are writing the anti-union bills don't know how unions work because they don't have enough experience with them either. But yeah, we're sort of up against people don't know anything a lot of the time, because how would they? I didn't know anything when I was, 19 years old either. Mm-hmm. And so, and I wouldn't have had I not, grown up in Boston listening to angry pro-union punk rock and, read some Marxist history.
Right.
So most people don't end up like me.
Yeah.
So how are we actually, how are unions, how is the UAW, how are other unions thinking about building that culture once again that is just, it was not that long ago that it was strong in Alabama, but it's been so thoroughly sort of crushed out of the public eye.
Yeah, we
Yeah.
just finished talking to Goldfield. Spent 45 minutes talking to him about that, and it really is, it is interesting how thoroughly it seems like the consciousness of our history has been beaten out of us, because, and he made this remark in a private conversation with us, and then he said it again on the air about how in West Virginia during the teacher strikes and those struggles in 2017 or whatever, there was a lot of callback to history. They were wearing red bandanas to pay homage to their grandfathers who were coal miners. And they were saying, we're in this tradition very clearly. We know our history. We are part of our history. And that's just not in Alabama, even though Alabama has just as legitimate a claim to that history that West Virginia does. And it's interesting that has happened, and I really don't have any theories about how it is that happened, because there are more union members in Alabama than there are in West Virginia right now. We have a higher union density rate than West Virginia. Our coal mines are still unionized. West Virginia's coal mines are not union by and large anymore. So I don't know if you have any thoughts about those differences between West Virginia and Alabama with respect to the history,
I'm thinking about Wisconsin, right? Wisconsin in 2011, that one of the reasons that there was this massive uprising across the state to try to save public sector unions, which is, it sounds like a nerdy thing to most people, right? This guy in Louisiana, again, couldn't figure out how to write legislation to actually kill them properly. Wisconsin teaches labor history in schools. That was such a big part of why that uprising was so big. And there's this really successful attempt to crush public schools in so many places. But also, I just think about when people have just had that beaten out of them, sort of literally, very literally in some cases, you have to do a lot more to build it back up. I was saying, I think when we were both still down there, that normally you count on you want to file with 70% because you're going to lose 20%. Well, we might have to count on losing 40% in somewhere like Alabama, in somewhere like Louisiana. That because there's not that. One of the things I found really interesting, I'm sorry, I'm kind of rambly this morning, was sitting there with a couple of the workers, and one of when they were doing these journalist roundtables with some of the union supporters, and they were saying, so one of the journalists asked, do you have family members who are union members? And both of them were like, no. And then they were like, well, yes, actually, my dad was in a union. And it was that, it was not even conscious, even though your dad was in a union. And I think, one of these questions is it's not only that people are not in unions anymore, it's that the unions that they're in are not building that kind of intense culture that they used to. I'm going to be that terrible, obnoxious person. I've got galleys of my new book behind me, but there's a chapter that I wrote on deindustrialization in that. And I was talking to people who had been coal miners in England, and how the mine and the union were at the center of everything you did, right? It wasn't just you were in a union at work and then you went home and you had this totally separate life. Everybody in the town was in the union. Everybody in the town worked in the mine some way. You went to the pub that was owned by the union. You went to, your kids played football on the pitch that was paid for by the union. You buried your family, your dad, when he died, his funeral was at the union hall, right? It was at the miners' welfare. This entire world that unions built, that meant that when Margaret Thatcher went to crush the unions, entire towns fought for them. And look, Maggie Thatcher succeeded, but we don't even have that anymore. And so 2 generations out from the end of that, people sort of don't remember it. And some of the pro-union workers were reading Robin Kelly's Hammer and Hoe, which made me very happy because I love that book. But in that interim between the moments of, Communist Party organizing and radical organizing across the South, and now, the unions that have hung on in the South have kind of had that fortress unionism mentality. And they're not building a thing that anybody else can see.
Right.
You know, and that's not just true in the South, by the way, it's true in a lot of places. Right. And so, yeah, what is that sort of step of like, not only we're building strong unions on the shop floor, but we're building strong unions that like everybody in town knows that the union is fighting for all of us, not just for the workers at the Mercedes plant, the VW plant, the mine,
right,
the Amazon warehouse.
Hey, 5 seconds, just wanted to say that this is only possible because of our donors. If you want to see more of this, then consider donating yourself at tvlr.fm/donate.
Yeah, it's it's a project, and hopefully, if it is the case that one of the real big missing ingredients is more serious labor history in schools, then our labor council is going to be making some strides on that. We have Adam's been leading a high school campaign where we're putting union members in classrooms and talking about labor history, and
I love it.
So maybe in 10 years in Huntsville we'll have a bunch of people wearing red bandanas going to high schools. But
I love it.
Lord
no,
willing,
that's
yeah.
great.
Yeah, Lord willing. So the NLRB announced yesterday that the UAW had filed objections to the election. And they are asking for a rerun. And I expressed to you the day before, I think it was, that I was very nervous about the potentiality of a CMEX ruling of the NLRB trying to impose a bargaining order. Which maybe might even sound kind of like a hot take for some folks, that I would not want the NLRB to impose a bargaining order. But I think I even had some questions about, like, is even asking for a rerun the right call, or should you just in a year go for a new election? Like, what do you, I'm not sure. But I'm sure that they've thought about that, and I'm sure they've talked to the workers about that, and it seems like, they feel convinced that the right thing is a rerun. But I am glad that there's not a pursuit of a bargaining order at this time. But I have my reasons, but it seemed like you were, you kind of concurred with my hesitation about a CMEX ruling in this case. So why would you think that it would be bad if the NLRB issued a bargaining order to Mercedes, even though they very clearly and we know they very clearly violated the law, and legally it would not be unwarranted. So from a legal perspective, a CMEX ruling would not be unwarranted here, but it's the politically is what I'm concerned about, politically in the kind of broadest sense. Like, anyway, so why would you be concerned about such a ruling?
Yeah, I mean, I think you're right. There's one of the reasons that like card check has been so hard to get right in this country is like people are really invested in the possibility and the promise of elections, which, I mean, I don't know how you can be at this point in time, considering the first election that I could vote in was George W. Bush's presidential election. The first one, the one they stole in Florida, as opposed to the second one that they stole in Ohio. So like, I have no faith in secret ballot elections to do anything, but a lot of people really believe strongly in their vote mattering. And like, again, particularly kind of in the South, where a lot of people had to fight to get access to the vote. Overruling it doesn't just overruling it doesn't necessarily feel like a great move. And like, especially because I didn't talk to that many no voters, but we, spoke with Jane Slaughter from Labor Notes, and she was there to hang it out in the parking lot talking to no voters. And a lot of them seem to have been convinced more by the carrots than the sticks. You know what I mean? Where people were saying like, oh, we've got this new CEO, let's give him a chance. And in that case, like, it doesn't seem like, because it's not, unfortunately, illegal for companies to bring in a new CEO in the middle of a union election, right? That's not an unfair labor practice.
right.
So they're perfectly allowed to do that, which is why they always do it. Even Walmart brought in a new CEO after there were, minority strikes in a minority of Walmarts in a minority of states in the country. And they brought in a new CEO who had been supposedly, brought up from the rank and file. So like, if that's the case, and if people were convinced to like give Mercedes one more chance, maybe, and say it's one more chance, based on this new CEO and his charm offensive, rather than like they were terrified. If that's the truth, then like overruling it by saying like, no, the workers are too terrified. Like it tells those workers that they don't know their own mind, you know?
Right.
And like, I think, you know, you have a chance as, you know, Rick Webster said to me right after the vote, he's like, you know, all right, the new CEO's got a chance now to, you know, prove the people who gave him another chance right. And, you know, they'll swing away from the union, or they will find out that nothing's going to change and they'll swing back toward the union. And I think, you know, the challenge now is like, I don't think this new CEO is going to change anything fundamentally. But also the challenge is also to sort of say, like, if he does, it's also because of the threat of the union.
Right.
And so, you know, you know, Shawn Fain rightly sort of said in his, you know, his speech after the vote, like, you know, they got the UAW bump, they got a raise, and they got the end of 2-tier because they were organizing.
Right.
They didn't get that because a company woke up one morning and decided to be nice. And they got this new CEO because they were organizing, not because the company woke up one morning and decided we're going to put a nicer guy in charge of the Mercedes plant in Vance, you know?
Right. Exactly. So yeah, we'll be following the campaign for a rerun election. I guess, do you have any thoughts on that tact on trying to pursue a rerun election through the NLRB, maybe more quickly than they could secure another election? You know, I mean, you have to wait a year before you can do just a standard clean, do cards and do the whole thing over again. You got to wait a year. I mean, do you think with this new NLRB that they could potentially secure an election more quickly? And then if they could, would that be good to have another election in 3 months?
Well, talking about my general dread of elections, like, you know, what's looming in November, right? So, you know, maybe they want to get another election in with a board that isn't completely run by fascists.
Yeah, that's a good point.
That makes a lot of sense to me. Because, you know, in a year from now, who the hell knows what we're going to be looking at, you know, with a federal government that looks more like the state governments in the places that you and I live. What are we going to be looking at in a year versus what are we going to be looking at in, you know, August, September? I imagine that that's on everybody's mind, because I think, you know, the UAW in particular knows that like Biden's policies are a thing that helped give them leverage in the big 3 strike, you know, not to take anything away from their, you know, tactics and organizing, but like, does GM agree to put battery plant workers on a master agreement if Biden isn't promising more subsidies for electric vehicles?
Right. Yeah,
you know,
that's a good point.
They're real things that we have to, you know, sort of be aware of.
Yeah, and I hadn't even thought of, you know, I had been thinking of the election in terms of like, oh, if Trump wins and the NLRB issued a bargaining order, that would be the end of the NLRB. But I wasn't thinking, I hadn't put the other together about how a rerun could potentially be more, so you would have some more structural advantages under a Biden NLRB than a Trump NLRB, and thus the impetus for a quick rerun. I think that makes sense.
You just saw a clip from the Valley Labor Report. We are live every Saturday morning from 9:30 a.m. till 12:30 p.m. And we pride ourselves on keeping all of our content free to everybody so that we can talk to as many working folks as possible. If you support the work that we're doing, you think that it's important, you think that it's good, then consider making a monthly contribution to the project, and you can do that on our website, tvlr.fm.